Bom dia, bem-vindos todos de volta. Welcome everyone back. Hello to everyone. Well, it's a pleasure today to have a class on both the Brazilian and the Palestinian agricultural movements. And for this class, it's an immense honor to receive a leader of the MST, the landless movement of Brazil, Cássia Bechara. Cássia is, she joined the movement in 2001 in the state of Pernambuco. And today she's the national director of the internationalism sector of the movement. She's graduated in social communication. She has collaborated and led and been in several encampments with the MST. So welcome, Cássia. Great to have you here. And our second guest is Izzat Zaidan. He's from the PARC, the Palestinian, very important agricultural development association. It's the Palestinian Agricultural Committee. Izzat is also in the leadership of this committee. And it's a great pleasure for you to bring today all your experience and insights for us in this class, Izzat. So Cássia will begin, and Cássia will be followed by Izzat, and then, as always, we'll have space for the Q&A. Thank you very much. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you, Arlene. Hi, Izzat. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with a Palestinian comrade. So good morning, bom dia, boa tarde, good morning, good afternoon, probably in some of the places. So as Arlene said, my name is Cássia. I'm a member of the landless workers movement in Brazil. I'm very happy to be here representing the movement, and especially to speak about a subject that's so dear to the landless workers movement, which is Palestine and our solidarity with the Palestinian struggle. To begin with, I just wanted to say that the Palestinian struggle has been an inspiration for the landless workers movement, and I'm sure for all the movements that fight for a better and more just world. And the resistance of the Palestinian struggle is something that we always look upon as an inspiration for our own struggles. MST is going to be 40 years old next year in 2024. And I can say that it's been 40 years of strong solidarity with the Palestinian people and with the Palestinian struggle. And also to say that we are launching today in São Paulo our national fair, the Agrarian Reform National Fair, after 5 years because of the pandemic, because of the neo-fascist government, we couldn't hold the fair. So we are launching today, and we are going to have an internationalist tent in our fair, in which we want to bring the struggles of peasants around the world through their production. And we are going to have products coming from the peasants from Palestine in our fair. And we hope also to use this space to dialogue with the Brazilian society and to bring to the Brazilian society the atrocities of the apartheid regime of Israel in Palestine and the struggle for a free Palestine. So, comrades, after this short introduction, just to say how important and how honored we are to share this space with Comrade Izzat, I'm going to use always the word comrade, and I hope you guys don't mind, but in our Brazilian tradition in the left in Brazil, comrades are the ones with whom we share the bread and we share the dream. And I'm sure that most of you who are here, we share the same dream of a free Palestine, of a free Brazil, free from the latifundio, from the large states, from agribusiness. So that's why I'm going to address you all as comrades during my presentation. I'm going to use my chronometer not to overspend my time. So, comrades, for the ones who are Brazilians, probably some of what I'm going to say here are not going to be new. I believe that most of Brazilians know at least a little bit of the landless workers movement, but I do need to make a brief, a brief presentation of the movement for the ones who are not familiar with the movement yet, so that we can go to the more specific issues that I wanted to bring to you today. So starting a little bit with the Brazilian agrarian context. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, next. Sorry. So, yeah, this is very basic for the ones who are not from Brazil. So this is Brazil in South America, the largest country in Latin America. Next. Yeah, this is all the states, how Brazil is geographically and politically organized. So in those 5 big regions and states. And yes, and so a little bit of the agriculture in Brazil. So as some of you may know, Brazil is a country that has one of the most unequal land distribution in the world. Next. Yeah. In the world. So we can say that more than 50% of all agricultural land in Brazil is in the hands of about 1% of the population. About more than 30 million hectares of Brazilian land are today owned by foreign companies. This data is from 2020, after Bolsonaro's government. I believe this number is higher today, but it's more than 30 million hectares of Brazilian land are owned by foreign companies. 120 million hectares of arable land in Brazil are unproductive. And there are more than 250 million hectares of state public land, which were illegally appropriated by the latifundio. Latifundio in Brazil is like large states. And when I say large states, I'm talking about lands that are sometimes bigger than the country of Portugal, and which is owned by one family, one person. Next. So, taking into consideration how unequally the land is distributed in Brazil, on the other hand, we have about 4.5 million landless families in Brazil, which means that are rural people, peasants, that either work for other people's farms, either rent a small piece of land in bigger states, either work for the agribusiness today. Next. So a little bit, because I'm talking a lot about agribusiness, so a little bit about what we mean by agribusiness. And then I'm going to give a little bit of historical context. So again, I'm sorry for the Brazilians who know that very well, but for the comrades who are not from Brazil, Brazil was colonized And the unequal distribution of land in Brazil began with the colonization, with the Portuguese colonization, when Portugal divided the lands, the Brazilian land, in very big lands and gave it for the Portuguese people to exploit and produce in those lands, basically for export for Europe. So at that time, it was basically sugarcane, coffee, which like the products that were more in need in Europe. So that's how the Brazilian land was used since the beginning, apart from the natural exploitation of wood, timber, and other things, gold, minerals. So we can say that Brazil is a country that is actually founded by three main pillars, which were large states, latifundios, slave work, and monoculture for export. Those were the pillars that formed Brazil as a country, right? So until the 80s, even we can say that Brazil was the last country in the world to abolish slavery. Until the 80s, that's how basically the land was still pretty much organized and divided. Large states owned by few families. Most of them used to produce steel, coffee, sugar cane, cattle, a lot of unused land, but the large landowners always hold a lot of political power in Brazil. So to have land also meant economic and political power in Brazil. So until the late 80s and early 90s, we would say that the struggle for land in Brazil or the struggle against the big landowners and against the violent and productive latifundio. When capitalism started developing in the countryside in Brazil, with the alliance between those landowners and transnational companies and the financial capital, the banks, is when we say that the agribusiness was actually consolidated in Brazil as a way, the main way of using the land and the main way of agricultural production in Brazil. So now we still have, especially in some regions, when we saw the map of Brazil, especially in the northeast and north of Brazil, we still have those old style landowners who own a lot of land, family lands, but most of them today are allied with transnational companies and the financial capital, which modernized the way of producing in the countryside, right? So Brazil is now one of the strongest bastions of agribusiness on global level. So that brought to the data that I told you before, that more than 30 million hectares of Brazilian land are owned by foreign companies, right? When we say that, it's foreign companies in alliance with Brazilian landowners. What is the agribusiness? It's basically using the land for monoculture, large extensions of monoculture to produce basically commodities for export. Today, most of the production in Brazil is soybean, corn, cattle, meat, and still sugarcane. So agribusiness in Brazil do not produce food. Agribusiness in Brazil produce commodities for export. Agribusiness in Brazil uses a lot of agrochemicals in the production. Brazil is one of the largest consumers of agrochemicals in the world. The last data says that each Brazilian drinks through what we eat about 5 liters of poison per year because of the large use of agrochemicals in the agribusiness production. Agribusiness is expanding the agricultural borders in Brazil and advancing to forests, the Amazon, and all the biomas in Brazil. So most of the environmental destruction in Brazil is also due to the advancement of agribusiness. Next. So in this context, let's just go back. You can show the next one. In this context of a very unequal distribution of land used basically for production of commodities through agribusiness and transnational companies in alliance with the large state owners. Lack of production of food for the Brazilian people because most of the land is used to produce commodities. Environmental destruction, a lot of landless families in the countryside which has no way to survive and to work. That's the history of Brazilian agrarian context, and that's the history of MST. So we can say that changing the agrarian structure in Brazil, redistributing the land, means to touch in the basic pillar of the capitalist development in Brazil, and touching in the basic pillar of capitalism itself, which is private property. Yes, next. So the MST, as I said in the beginning, my introduction, is going to be 40 years old next year, 2024. And we were born different from many other organizations, which were born from an idea, let's say. People who got together and say, okay, we have a problem of land in Brazil, so let's organize a movement to fight for better land distribution, right? So from a need, people start organizing a movement or an organization. The MST was actually born from struggles which were already happening in the countryside in Brazil. So at the end of the military dictatorship, at the late 70s, the situation in the countryside were so difficult for the landless families that the families started occupying unproductive land by themselves without any formal organization. Just like, okay, we have no place to live, we have no place to work, we have no space to plant. There is a very big land here which is not being used. Let's just get in the land and start living there. And this started happening in the south of Brazil, in different places, in a more not organized way, right? In 84, with the help of the Theology of Liberation in Brazil, the Pastoral Land Commission, organized a meeting with representatives of those land occupations to get together, to exchange experience, to get to know that other families were also doing the same, so on. And from that meeting, they decided they needed to be organized. They needed to build a national movement with three main objectives. And those are the three main objectives that MST holds until now, 40 years later. The first one is the struggle for land, right? So as I said, the large states, the plantations, the slave labor are the foundations of the Brazilian state and the foundations of the development of capitalism in Brazil. So democratization of land means a structural change in the system in Brazil. And the main tactic that MST has always used and still uses to guarantee the democratization of land is the occupation of private-owned land or land which is state land and has been illegally appropriated by private owners by the landless families. So the landless families organize MST. MST is the landless families, right? So we organize the families to occupy those lands, to claim those lands for agrarian reform. In doing so, they are confronting the very basic foundation of capitalism, which is private property. Next. And what actually gives legitimacy for this tactic of land occupation is that after 1988, after the military dictatorship, Brazil redraw our constitution, and it was a process. I mean, it was at that time in which the workers' organizations were quite strong because we came from a long period of struggle against military dictatorship. So was during that period that MST, the Labour Party, the CUT, the Union Confederation were created. And the process of redrawing the constitution was quite participative. And because of the struggle during the redrawing of the constitution, we were able to gain a lot of very progressive pieces in our new constitution. Many of them are only written in the constitution, but one of them is the piece that says that every land in Brazil, private or not, must fulfill its social function. What does that mean? That every land in Brazil must comply with three main elements. First, it must have a minimum level of productivity. This minimum level is set by the government, right? Second, it must respect environmental law. Third, it must respect labor law. It must not be used for any illegal cultivation or illegal activity. If any land does not comply with any of those elements, productivity, environmental, labor, illegal activities, if it does not comply with any of those elements, it must be taken by the government for agrarian reform purposes. This is written in our constitution, right? So what we do when we occupy a land that we know does not fulfill its social function is just say the government, look, do your job. This land does not fulfill its social function. It should be taken for agrarian reform, as the constitution says. Next. The second goal of MST is to fight for people's agrarian reform, right? And for us, agrarian reform is much broader than just the distribution of land, right? The distribution of land is the first step. The second step is what are we going to do with those lands now? right? Those lands are now in the hands of the workers, but we don't want them to have the same function that it used to have when it were in the hands of the latifundios or the landowners. So it's much broader. It has to do with how the land is used, how the land is cultivated, how the production is organized, how the social relations are done in that land. And the third goal is the fight for radical change in the Brazilian society, and understanding that our role as a movement, a peasant movement, struggling for people's agrarian reform is just one small piece of a broader project that we need to build for the whole Brazilian society. Next. So MST is organized in 24 out of the 27 states in Brazil. It involves today about 1.5 million people, right? And so we have about 400,000 families which have already been settled. And when we say settled, comrades from Palestine, please don't misunderstand me. It's just the way the Brazilian law designs a land in an agrarian reform project, right? It has nothing to do with the Israeli settlements in Palestine, please. And we have about today 90,000 families which are still in the camps fighting to get their lands officialized by the government. Next. Next. So how we organize MST. So the camps, when we say the camps are formed when a group of families organize on a productive latifundio in order to call the attention of the government that this latifundio must be taken for agrarian reform. And I don't say expropriated because in Brazil the land is not expropriated, because the government, when it decides that a land must be taken for agrarian reform, the government actually buys that land. So the farmer, the landowner, doesn't lose anything because the government actually buys the land. The land becomes state land, and then the state gives the farmers, the peasants, the right to use that land. So the camp is when the land is not still officialized as agrarian reform land. Until the legal process of expropriation is finished, the families keep living in the area under the constant risk of being evicted, either by the police or by private militias paid by the landowner. For the state, for the government, the camps are considered illegal. Why? Because in one hand, the Constitution says that every land that does not fulfill its social function must be taken for agrarian reform. On the other hand, the same Constitution says that we need to respect the sacred rights to private property. So occupying private land is not legal in Brazil, which does not mean that it's not legitimate. So the camps are what we call the space of struggle and resistance. And to be able to live in the camps, the family needs to, from the beginning, start organizing in a very collective way. Next. So what we call settlements, and again, I'm sorry for the word itself is just a very different concept of settlement that the Israelis have. But the settlement is when that camp, that occupation, have already been through the whole legal process and have already been bought by the government and taken as an agrarian reform territory. So one important thing is that in the MST territories, the MST settlements, which are the official agrarian reform territories, the families who live there, they do not receive the private title of the land. The land keeps being state land, and the families have the right to use that land and to live in that land, and even to pass that land to their children, as long as they keep living and using and producing the land. But the families cannot sell the land because they don't have the private title of the land. And we don't want they to have, because in our understanding, true agrarian reform is actually de-merchandise the land. Land must be for people's use. So that's how our settlements or our liberated territories are organized. Next. MST is, from the beginning, we understand that the only way to first be able to make the struggle for distribution of land, and second, to organize what we understand by people's agrarian reform, is through collective participation. So we gave a name to the way we organize ourselves, that we say it's organicidade. There is no translation for this word. It's more than organization structure, because organization structure seems something very strict. And for us, organicidade is much more the way it has to have movement. It's a cultural way of doing things. It's a way in which the work of each part of the movement affects the whole movement, and what gives this unity and collectiveness of the movement. And the principles that guide our way of organizing are: first, collective leadership; second, division of task; third, gender composition of groups; autonomy; planning; discipline and respect for collective decisions; criticism and self-criticism; study; and ongoing connection with our social base. So those 9 organizational principles is what guides the way we organize ourselves. To respond to those principles, we need to build an organizational way in which we guarantee all those principles: collective leadership, division of task, gender participation, and so on. Next. So how the families are organized. So in the camps and in the liberated territories, I'm going to use this term and not settlements, so that we are clear of what we mean. The families are organized in a very democratic and participatory structure that to make decisions in the MST. So in each area, the families organize themselves in groups of around 10 families, in which they discuss everything regarding that territory, right? And in which every person takes charge of one task, right, in the territory. This is the way that we can guarantee the participation and the ownership. Ownership not in terms of private title, but collective ownership of that territory. From every group, they choose a man and a woman, always a man and a woman, to coordinate the group. And all the main decisions are taken in assembly. So after discussion in the family groups, they go to the assembly with the discussion of all the family groups to decide about the major issues of the territory. Next. Now you can go on. Next. This is quite difficult to understand. Next. State level. Next. So just for you to understand on the national level, and this is how we build from the camps and settlements. We have our collectives, which are the main areas in which we need to work in each territory and at the national level. We can go to next, please. I think it's easier to understand. Next slide, please. Yes. No, next again. Sorry, comrades. we start organizing in the territories. If in the family groups, everyone takes one task and form the collectives of that territory, right? And then from that collectives, they form, from the representatives of the collectives of each territory, they form the state direction, and every state choose one man and one woman to represent them in the national direction. So the national direction of MST today is formed by about 75 people, made of representatives of each state, one man and one woman, representatives of each collective and sector of work, and the national coordination, which meets the national direction meets every 3 months. It's more executive, and the national coordination and the national congress is actually what gives the main political lines of MST for the next period. So it's more strategic, right? Next. So we have, as I said, from the territories to the national level, we organize in sectors and collectives of work, which are basically education, gender, political education, health, culture, production and cooperation, communication, human rights, youth. Next. There are more. Women, international relations, which is the internationalism collective. I'm not going to go through every collective because we don't have time for that, and I don't think that's the most important. So we can just move a little bit because my time is almost, you can move. So political education sector. Next, the gender sector, which is basically to organize the women and women's participation. We also have what we call the LGBT collective. Next, human rights sector. Next, international relations, culture. Next, communication sector. Yes, that's it for the presentation. I still have 5 minutes that I would like to talk a little bit more about, well, as we say in the MST, the earth where I step, which is the internationalism sector. So MST has always understood that we will never be able to really fulfill our 3 main objectives: the struggle for land, the struggle for agrarian reform, and the struggle for social transformation in Brazil isolated. And that's why we build alliances with all other movements and political organizations in Brazil, which has the same horizon, and also at international level. And we do understand that our alliances in the international level must have 2 dimensions. The first one is the strategic dimensions. It's very clear for us, and I do know that for the Palestinians as well, that we won't be able to really advance in our struggles if we don't build international alliances. In a world of very globalized capitalism, it's not possible for us to struggle only. The struggle themselves, it's at national level, but it needs to be articulated with the international struggles. And the second is the solidarity, that we understand that international solidarity is one of the main values that we need to build for the new society that we want to build. So that's why for us, it's also very important to build links with movements, organizations from other countries, and especially organizations that represent the most oppressed people in the world. Well, comrades, 35 minutes. I think this is just a brief presentation of MST. It's 40 years of movement, so it's not much time to talk about 40 years of history in 30 minutes. But I think here the objective was to draw some lines of how we work, how we organize our objectives, so that we can exchange some ideas and some reflections here. So thank you very much.
My audio. Kasia, thank you very much for that very clear, very helpful, insightful presentation about the whole history of what is the most important social movement in Latin America today, and has been since the 90s at least. And Isat, please welcome. We'd love to hear your exposition about the Palestinian agricultural movement and your experience. Your audio and the presentation. Yes, we're going to. You're muted, Isat. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, sorry for that. Hello and many thanks, Kasia. Many thanks, Ellen. So after this, let's say, constructive, good presentation of my colleague. So if you want me to talk about the Palestinian case, I have only one slide summarized the whole situation and how the historical, let's say, evolution of the humanitarian and the national case of Palestine. If we go a little back, I'll tell the story, how things. During that, I'll try to focus in specific about the landless rights and all these things. So my name is Idza Zidan. I'm working with one of the oldest, let's say, NGOs, Palestinian non-governmental organization. Main area of interest for PARC, which is the acronym of my organization, is rural area. So we work mainly in rural community and rural area, which is by the time became as area C, unfortunately. So in 1917, sorry for the history, but we want to learn from the history. In 1917, when the Ottoman Empire defeated, Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire at that time. But before that, bill for promise for the Jewish as a state in Palestine was given for the Jewish for power relation, influence of the Israeli and all these things. So we became under the British mandate. During that time, there is a growing trend for state land, the concept of state land. Most of the farmers, most of the owners in the Ottoman, before the takeover or the mandate by the Britain, Palestine takeover, it was private, but farmers, they escape due to the taxation system imposed by the Ottoman for the farmers. Usually they declare a specific small amount of land ownership. And by the Ottoman law, if you declare it, that's the legal dimension. whatever less it became after 7 years, if it's not cultivated, 7 years, it's become a state land. So we fully agree in the concept of the social value, utilization, rights, as my colleague is saying. But because of that, at that time, the poverty, the Ottoman, we lost most of our land and it became as a state land. So when the British mandate take over the Palestinian, most of our land became as a state land, unfortunately. So we continue on that. Farmers during that period, the landlord and the capitalism system in the country here, most of the farmers, they started strike. And the biggest one was in 1936. So all of it is Palestine at that time, Palestine. There is nothing called Israel, nothing called PNA, Palestinian National. So it's Palestine. Jewish and Palestinian, they lived together up to 1920, more than 120 Jewish, Palestinian Jewish, living in the country in a peace, as part of our community, social structure, and so on. So there is no, let's say, colonialism dimension for that. It's a matter of citizenship. And we have nothing against the Jewish. Then after the 1936, the national strike, the UN, they send a mission and they issue a white paper about the future of Palestine. So it was they continue their work from 1938 and they reach a decision. If you go for the map for 1946, you see the whole with Palestine, and there is small Jewish community there and there. They reach a decision to, let's say, to divide Palestine between the Israeli and the Palestinian. If you look for 1946, you see most of it's owned by Palestinian, many by Palestinian, except few settlements, the oldest one in the Jordan Valley near the Dead Sea, and the rest in the coastal area where is most of our fertile land is there. Palestine by that time is part of Beirut for the Ottomans. So most of the families in the country, they are landlord from Damascus, from Beirut, from Jordan, also Palestinian. But it's open as part of a whole of the Arab, let's say, nations surrounding Palestine. Then Israeli, in that UN resolution for dividing Palestine, there is a precondition, two states, not one state, Israeli state and Palestinian state, which is not the case since that time. So in 1948, Israel, they took over most of our coastal area. The British, the rest of the land of Palestinian territory annexed, it became for two parts, one under the Jordanian, let's say, mandate, annexed to Jordan, controlled by Jordan, and the Gaza Strip for the annexed to Egypt, to be governed by the Egyptian. So 1948, then we faced with in 1956, this is a war, regional war against Egyptian, against Nasser, who's launched a Marshall program for landless, especially in Egypt. This is the first. If we need to study this experience in Egypt, because Nasser, one of his big achievement is redistribution of lands in Egypt, including Gaza at that time, for the landless or the small. So they shift the ownership from landlord, from the state, to the farmers, which is one step in advance ahead. So 1956, war against Nasser, because of his social agenda, for his social program for the Arab nation, by French, by Israeli, and by Britain at that time. So, and during that time, if you go for 1947, you see that the case, the legal case. 1948, this is another expansion for the Jewish share of land. And I will say something for Gassia. Settlement, human settlement, this is something respectful. Colonization is the difficulty we have. Displacement of the people is the problem we have it. I mean, the settlement, this is a misuse of the terminology from the legal perspective. I am a human. I have the right to settle. I have the right. Settlement, for us, Israeli settlement in our country is a colonization, not a settlement. People have the right to settle in their own land, in their state, their own state land. So I do not have this sensitivity when we say settlements. No, what we have it in Palestine here is not a settlement. It's a colonization. So in 1967, the second, when Arab were they lost, let's say, the war against Israel, Israel took over the whole country. The second military order in 1967, after we defeated in that war, was the second military order is about water resources in Palestine, because we cannot talk about land without water. Land productivity, this is land utilized for better utilization, you want water. So the first strategy, the second military decision taken by the Israeli at that time to take over and to govern the water resources in Palestine. And if I have time later on, if any colleague question about that, I can tell the story of water. It's not only land. So after that, I will say 1973, this is the third war for Arab against Israeli at that time. And then from that time until 1976, Palestinian, they start their national movement, national strike against all these procedures and measures taken by Israel. And the first intifada, I would say the first intifada was 1976, it's not 1988. Then they assassinated most of our elected mayor as a Palestinian inside Palestine here. So from 1948, 1967, thousands and thousands of refugees, they left their homeland and they escaped to the diaspora. Even they reached Chile and Brazil at that time. But most of them, they are located in Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, because they have the hope to return back to their homeland. So 1978, Israeli have a war against Lebanon because PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, at that time, start giving, let's say, hard time for the colony, I would say, in the north part of Palestine, rocket and bombing from Lebanon. So 1978, Al-Litani War, we call it. Al-Litani, the small river in Lebanon, southern part of Lebanon. Because Israel, they cannot survive without water. Land is important, but the second important for them is water. So they reach Al-Litani River, and they want to ensure 40 kilometers from their border to be safe, in a safe position against the Palestinian or different militant organization, PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization. 1982, this is the second major attack war by Israeli against Lebanon when they reach Beirut at that time. And they succeed in expelling PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, from Lebanon. Then the PLO members at that time, they start move to Tunisia, to Yemen, to everywhere. So we left Lebanon at that time. Why I'm saying in 1982? Israeli, and at that time in 1982, this is the best timing for them to expand the settlement or the colonization in West Bank, because when PLO in Lebanon at that time, there is something, a power we can rely on as a Palestinian, but no more power at that time. And at the same time, Sadat, the Egyptian president, he signed a peaceful solution with Israel. So no power for Palestinian now. The Arab world, they abandoned the Palestinian case, and the PLO is defeated and migrant to Tunisia, Yemen, and so on. And Israeli taking over our land aggressively. And at this stage, I'll tell my story. I born in 1963. The first when I'm a child, 4 years, 1967. Then I get my education and so on. I left my village in 1981 to get my higher education in Egypt. At that time, there is no single colonization or settlement in my town. After they defeat PLO in 1982, since that time till today, I have 8 settlements in my own town with a population higher than the Palestinian in my town. That means they have the natural growth, they call it natural growth, whatever it is, which make most of Palestinian in my village landless. They have no land. They have no access to their land. And my colleague, later I will say how we suffer from that dimension. So 1998, so for the time being, we have 8 settlements in my own town. My own town total area is around 36,000 dunum. We have dunum, not hectares. One hectare equal 10 dunums. Now, 2/3 of the land of the, I would say, my town land is settler, Israeli settler land. It's not as a Palestinian anymore. So in 1988, for me, is for the world is the second intifada. No, for Palestinian maybe it's the 10th. Since 1920, we have repeated intifada movement in Palestine against the occupation, whoever it is. So in 1988, the first intifada, and they succeed. If just to refresh our memory, intifada is started by a group of workers assassinated by Israeli from Gaza in Negev, they call it in Negev. Doing that, they do similar things for Bedouin. It's not only who's doing plant production in Palestine, also Bedouin. All the time, they try to gather Bedouin, to resettle the Bedouin, because they want the land and they want the water. So in 1998, Intifada started, then everything. Once a day, 1994, we wake up with the Oslo Accord, Oslo Agreement. The Oslo, by nature, by definition, is a legal, let's say, agreement between PLO and the State of Israel. Whereas within that article, if any researcher interested to study the Oslo Accord, he will see that Palestinian, we pushed for that negotiation, because Tunisia at that time, they give a signal for Palestine to leave Tunisia because of the pressure. Yemen at that time, they give a signal for, so we are pushed for Oslo. And Baker at that time, he said this is the last chance for Palestinians. This is a moving train. They can ride it or they can have no other chances. So we are cornered, pushed for this peace negotiation, Madrid, then Oslo 1994. BNA came back without, it's in Oslo, without any sovereignty of water resources, of land, whatever, its area, B, C, D, whatever the classification they want to. They classified the Palestinian territory area A inside the city, where the Palestinian National Authority have the control. A question mark on that. Then for other urban community, let's say rural area, within the communities itself, it's B. That means from security perspectives for Israel. This is something playing games. And if you remember, when the Soviet Union collapsed, we received in Palestine million refugees from Russia. And they resettled them inside West Bank, not only Tel Aviv. So you see, a very small country with a very limited population receiving floods from the Russia, from the wish, because under the right of return for Israeli, but not the right of return for Palestine. The right to use land, but not the right of Palestinians to use their land. So within that Oslo Accord, under the classification A, B, and C, we lost no more sovereignty for Palestinian over land, even A, even B, even C. And I'll move a little bit for the second intifada in 2000. Also, and this, if you remember, they start say about construction of the separation wall and annexation of fertile land, and they start the story. Separation wall itself, if you go and check what's the meaning of the apartheid separation wall for us, it's annexation of most of the rest of the fertile land in the western part under the security accusation, and the most productive water in that area, in the semi-coastal area. So now we have, I know that a lot of my colleagues talk about the separation, the apartheid wall, and so on. So what I'm trying to tell you, the second story. Then we luckily have the first election, a democratic process in 2006, where Hamas take over. What's happening in Gaza? In 2008, we had the first war against Gaza. 2012, we had the second war. 2014, we have the third war. 2018, we have the fifth. 2021, and now we are in 2023. If a child born in 2006 or 7, what kind of a human being we will have? We need a Marshall psychosocial support for our people who's living bombed all the time. A child born in 2006, that means he witnessed at least 6 or 7 wars. What kind of a human being we will have? So for me, land or water, I cannot say, but it's a matter of a human right. It is a matter of human dignity. It's a matter of justice. All the time, what we are trying to do, to provide farmers with inputs, rural community to stay in their lands. All statistic nowadays shows that Palestinian in Area C, according to Israeli definition, because we cannot accept this definition or segregation classification plan, 150,000 Palestinians there. This is ARID, one of the institution research we have it. And we have, for the time being, around 700 settlers in 62% of our lands. And they open it for settlement every time. So the idea for us, it's not a matter of settlement, is to establish. I am a Palestinian, I'll settle in Nablus, in Hebron, in Jordan Valley. No, they want a mass movement of Palestinians to be cornered in ghetto. This is the mentality they have it. This is how I fully respect their suffering. As a Palestinian, as a human being, I fully respect their suffering. But usually when I discuss an Israeli, and we still believe there is a space for that, the leftist party or whatever, well, I'm saying you suffer a lot during the history from the Western. How you accept the other suffering for that. So for me, it's a continuation. Inshallah, it will be ended soon. Inshallah, because enough blood for us, enough blood, enough suffering for both. But the idea, as a Palestinian, I have the right, based in the national and international, human and UN, and international law. I have this right to access, utilize, get the benefit of improve the small scale farmers. And I'll give some statistic in anybody he can go through it. For the time being here in Palestine, West Bank and Gaza, about this division, more than 27% of our people, they are poor. Maybe the percentage is not high compared even with Jordan, but if we as a Palestinian given the chance to use our land, to use our natural resources enough, we will not be in need to be beggars around the world and to ask for solidarity and support. What we feel as a Palestinian, I'm optimistic about the future. Despite all these shortages and pressure put in our shoulders, the idea I want to give hope for my children, about the young generation, about the future. So for us, it's a human tragedy. It's a power relation influence. It's unjust. There is no justice behind that. Israeli have the right to return back and to utilize, to annex whatever, because God, He gave them this promise. This is unhuman. And if you, before a week, if you watch when they celebrate in their Independence Day, Israeli Independence Day, and Ursula, the head of the European Union, she gratitude for the Israeli for changing the desert for a blooming green. So this is something, and for us it's unhuman, unfair. What we are looking for is justice. When we are saying that for our national struggle, as an NGO also we are blaming and try to hold BNA accountable. It's not the Israeli accountable for human right violation. It's also BNA. They should be accountable. So for us, believe me, as a Palestinian, I'm 60 years old nowadays. The idea, what the message I can send it, convey for my children, almost they are 25. You see how many Palestinians they think if in the Mediterranean try to escape from Gaza through Egypt or Tunisia or Libya, or they think in the Mediterranean. So for us, it's a matter, believe me, it's a matter of we don't want to lose the hope. And the main challenge for Palestinians nowadays, if you watch the news for the last 48 hours, bombing Gaza, and settlers surrounding Gaza Strip, because according to the international law, this is not their land. According to the law, not de facto on ground, not the power relationship. So as a Palestinian, inshallah, we fully trust in the movement worldwide about the peace movement. Not the Ursula, the EU head. She is congratulate the Israeli about changing Palestine to a green, blooming the green here. So they distract all our resources as a nation. So for me, Inshallah, will be better future for all of us. I fully respect certain segment, certain group within the Israeli community who still believe, but there is a shrinkage space under this huge pressure from the right wings in both sides. It's not only Israeli right wings there, also the Jordan in the Arab world there is a growing trend in the right wing all over the world. Europe now it's moved more or less for more religious. So inshallah, we will have better future together. We still believe we have supporters all over the world who believe in human rights and justice. This is my very short contribution for this seminar, and I'm open for any question from any of your colleagues. Thanks a lot.
Dr. Izzat, thank you very much. You said that was a small contribution. Actually, in my opinion, it's very important for us to hear this very personal account. It's the account of someone who is living the situation every day, working with the Palestinian Agricultural Committee. So it's very different for us to hear the situation. And I'd like to start off. We'll have questions coming from the chat from our students, but I'd like to start off asking a question, but start off with a small comparison. When we talk about the countryside, the agricultural workers in Palestine, we know that everything that you try to organize is undermined by occupation, is undermined by the Israeli military incursions, undermined by the complete lack of human rights and compliance that is the reality in Palestine in regard to the Palestinians. The first time I was in Palestine, I was very naive, and I was in Bethlehem at the hotel. I saw small cubes of Israeli butter and some Israeli bread and some Israeli whatever products at the breakfast. And I was in Bethlehem. I was in Palestine, and I was sad. I wanted to eat Palestinian products. And I was thinking, as I said, I was very naive and very young, and I was thinking, but doesn't Palestine produce? Isn't there butter? Isn't there, wonderful bread? Where are the products? And then with time, the hotel decided to not worry so much and start putting in local, vegetables and this and that and olive oil. So in the end, we end up understanding that the main problem is not production. Palestinians produce a lot, from what I know. It's circulation. It's managing to circulate the product. It's managing to keep up the business, the farming, the small familiar farming or a larger business or whatever it is. But it's all the problems created by occupation itself. And then there is ethnic cleansing. Other than that, the settlements that grow, the incursions that come in. So you have a whole situation in which, in the end, there are like two levels of problems. There is the political problem, very real military problem, which is caused by occupation, by the reality of the global reality of Palestine, the overall reality of Palestine. And then you have a smaller dimension, a local, let's say, dimension, which is the difficulty for the small farmer, worker, etc., to actually live on his product. He can't circulate. So it's like you have two dimensions. And when I bring in the MST here, sorry if I'm making this long, but I'll get to where I want to provoke you to see if you can give me some insights. When we come into, for example, the MST or other movements, we always see solidarity on the first level, on the level of okay, we want the end of occupation. We want Palestine to be free. We're solidarity with the independence of Palestine, with this movement. This is our main goal. Yes, it is. but also aren't there, let's say, experiences, models of cooperatives, of working without poison, of small local actions that can be put in place to make this solidarity maybe take a step further, because both are very important in my view, So I'd like to hear maybe first Cassia and then Izat. And finally, just to finish this, I mean, we know that more and more the word sumud has become so important to describe the Palestinian resistance. It's staying, it's resilience, it's to stay on the land. That is what defines today maybe the largest dimension. It's this, person per person. Every person stays on the land as long as he can. And that has made an immense difference. How can we help this to happen? Sorry if that was a bit long.
No, just maybe. Yes, you want to comment on that, then I will. Yes.
Thank you very much, Arlene. I will be quite brief, but I think the question you pose is very important, and we do agree with that. So solidarity cannot only be like, it's also important, but it can't only be statements and letters and what is the practical solidarity that we can bring to the people of the world in struggle, and in this case especially to Palestine. Well, in the case of MST, I can speak of three experiences which are very important for us. We have a lot of strong relationships with Palestinian organizations. So one of the very important ways of working together in solidarity with those organizations are the political education course that we hold in our national schools. So we have a national political education school just outside of São Paulo, the Florestan Fernandes National School. And in 2015, we started organizing international political education course in English language for militant activists. Here in Latin America, we say militants, but activists and militants and of political organizations from all over the world. And we always are very, very careful to have as many Palestinians as possible in those political education courses. And those first is not only the theoretical issue of the political education course, but those courses allow the Palestinian comrades to build links with organizations from all over the world during the course. The second initiative is our internationalist brigade, Gassan Kanafani, which is solidarity brigade, where militants from MST go to Palestine for 2 months during the olive harvest campaign, so that we can work with the Palestinian peasants in the harvest, in the olive harvest. Also, the presence of internationals during the harvest minimize a little bit the repression and the violence that the Israelis, that the Palestinians suffered from the Israelis, Israeli army and the Israeli colonizers or whatever. And the third one is one initiative that we are building with WALC. WALC is the Union of Agricultural Workers Committee of Palestine. It's very close to us. So we are organizing now an exchange in order to build together an agroecology school in Palestine, in some of the Palestinian communities. So the idea of WALC is to build an agroecology school, which will also be a political education school, but also very basic, based on agroecology for the Palestinian peasants. And we are doing that together from the experience that MST has with our agroecology schools. So those are three examples of practical solidarity, which for us is building together, is struggling together, is being part of the Palestinian struggle with our bodies when we talk about the Internationalist Brigade, but also with whatever we have accumulated in our years of experience that is not ours, but it must be at the service of the Palestinian struggle as well. And Aline, Isad, I'm very, very sorry. I will have to go. I said in the beginning that we are starting our national fair, and there is a small problem there, and people are calling me. So I'm very, very sorry. But we will keep in touch, Isad. This year we will have our Internationalist Brigade. It will be great if our comrades can also meet you there. We normally, after we go to the harvest, we spend some time in Ramallah to meet organizations and so on. So I hope I will get your contact and we can also strengthen our links of solidarity with the Palestinians and the organization. Arlene, thank you very much. And I'm very, very sorry that I have to go.
No, it's fine, Cassia. I saw that you wrote, that you described this issue. No problem at all. And I'm glad that you answered first this question, because this was the one question that I wanted to hear your input on. Thank you very much for being with us, Cassia. That was really very important, very good. Thank you very much.
Thank
you, Kasia. Thank you. And to see you in Palestine, Kasia, inshallah.
Oh, great. Thank you, comrade.
Yeah.
And we'll continue here with Isat.
Can I comment on your question? Try to answer it. I'll give an example on that. The resilience for us is at 3 levels. The resilience, when we are talking about resilience, part of it, local produce, environment, ecological produce, and so the consumption, national campaigning, all these things we are doing it. But when we are talking about resilience, we are talking the community resilience, the system resilience, and the government resilience for us, according to UN definition. So what we do at lower level, community resilience, inter-trading within community, locally produce, quality, because we take care of the consumer at the same time. But I'll give you an example. The transaction cost, because of the checkpoint of the locally produce from one city to other city, it raised the price, the total price, by 7%. Because most of the time the blockade, Hebron and Bethlehem, they isolated from the middle, with a container checkpoint. There is if they delay the fresh produce, that means khalas, this is a losses for farmer. So they push us, they corner us to localize, not nationalize our system or our let's say, because farmer in the north, they can get benefit from the prices in Hebron area market. We do not have this. This is an example with the 7% just for transaction for transportation costs. This is in one hand. As a Palestinian, we do not have direct contact for import-export. Most of the imports come through a lot of middlemen, retailer, most of them Israeli. This is according to Paris protocol, the commercial, the relation commercial. There is no differences between the prices here and the Israeli more than 15%, while their income in the Israeli is 4 times the Palestinian income, their purchasing power in Israeli. The flooding, they flood our market with XX product. If they do not succeed they use our market as a dumping market for us. So what we do in Park? In my institution, we keep this local produce. We try to, with all these difficulties, we export it to 28 countries all over the world, because we are a productive nation. We are not in need for, they change us by the time for beggars. And Netanyahu is talking about economic peace solution. It's not a political. What we need is a political. It's a political. When we finish with the political, everything they can reform. Not for the economy. No, we cannot separate our economy from our political willingness and control of the sovereignty. We have no sovereignty our border. So the idea for us it's a self-resistance for a short period of time, not a long-term strategy. We need to be independent, a free country. To reach that point, we have our own mechanism to resist and revive, and to keep farmers on ground in their locality. It's clear for us. So what we need from the student, from the Brazilian, not only, all over the world, is to put pressure for more justice. It's a political will rather than a solidarity. And many thanks for the solidarity, of course.
Perfect. We understood that. Thank you. I'd like to now put questions from the students that they sent to the chat and the wonderful team collected. So the first one, I don't have the name of whoever put this question, sorry, but the person was, I would like to ask you, if possible, to speak a little, making a parallel about the migratory phenomenon and the expulsion of rural communities from their lands as a consequence of the process of land appropriation by capitalist movements and colonizing routes such as the agribusiness system. I have the impression this was for Cassia. It seems to me like it was for Cassia, but maybe there's a parallel here with Palestine. If we think a bit, Izad, could you mention a bit the role not only of the political structure of occupation, but how about the role of also big business, Israeli big business in this occupation?
I will start from the second part for me. You see, everyone is talking about SDG goals 2030 and how the environment, the climate, the adaptation, all these things, the Amazon forest and all these things. What the consequences we have it in Palestine? According to the SDG goal, most of the dirty industry not allowed to continue inside Israel for private. They shifted to Palestinian area, Palestinian community. And there is a report, I think that I will circulate it very soon, about stone cutting businesses in Palestine, because they need our stone for their building, their construction, but it's not allowed in Israel. So they start the shift private Palestinian Israeli economy. This is for me, it's a corruption. It's not a matter of businesses. So most of their dirty industry, they transferred it to the Palestinian territory. Of course, without control, we cannot impose our regulation, our standard, our best practices. But this is how they deal with the private. Private is a matter of transaction cost. Well, the Israeli, this is the most profitable market for Israeli is the Palestinian as a consumer. It's one truck within 1 hour they can transfer, they can ship their goods to Palestine here. At the same time, we cannot send our goods to Israeli because there is a lot of protocol standard from their side. We have to comply with their standard, but we have no enforcement to control whatever they send it to our market. So you see, businesses, private is there, but for the benefit of the Israeli, because they have the power at the end of the day. And they have 3 major checkpoints for merchandising between Palestine and Israeli, and they have their own regulation. In Gaza, they are not allowed to import, export, unless it's fully security check, whatever it is, quality check, whatever it is, and we register a lot of losses because of the privatization. I need the private to be responsible. A national investment, not a private as a capitalism or I hope I answered that part, if it's convenient for my colleague.
Yes, and this reminds me of something I'd like to ask you very directly. Is Palestinian agricultural production mostly without poisons, without agrotoxics?
We in Palestine, promoting what we call it safe production, responsible consumption. This is part of our program in the country here, going for let's say good agriculture practices, less chemical, less pesticide. We call it nowadays. Before it was GAP, good agriculture practice, organic, and so on. Now we are talking about safe production, but continue for the previous question. We do not have in a country here a certified labs to do such analysis to ensure food hygiene and food safety. So we send it usually to Israel to check it because as a request for export. So, but this is one of the main concern for PAC, is the safe production and responsible consumption and fair business relation, of course.
Thank you. And then I have read in articles related to this subject that it's very frequent for the Palestinian production, which is safe, produced without poison, when it goes to the Israeli certification system, because they don't want this production to flourish, they stamp it with not safe. Does this happen a lot?
I mean, during to be neutral and to be on that, they have what they call it a very high standard back to him inspection institution in Israel. Taken. It's a national certification. No, it's happened sometime. I believe in the system they do it, in the technicalities. They are not harming our import-export because of that. But the idea sometimes they delay the test. They do not. It's very costly for us. If we send a sample, it's a huge cost for a small producer. So, but from technically, no, I fully respect, let's say, their technicalities. And I can say it's not politicized in that dimension.
Okay, thank you. The next question here, is there a 100% Palestinian product? I mean, without Israeli interdiction. Okay, is there a 100 Palestinian product, something that you can say, okay, this is 100 Palestinian with no Israeli influence in this production?
There is no 100 all over the world, 100 pure Palestinian or pure Brazilian. We import our input from Ukraine, our pesticide, our seeds from Israel. We do a process. When you go for the supply, demand, supply, consumers change, and the value change for any commodity, and you find most of the input is coming from outside. It could be Israeli, it could be from India. All over, we are open, global. I mean, so there is no 100, even for olive oil, which is our olive tree, a holy olive tree. Sometimes the input for production is Israeli. This is normal, and we have nothing against that. We can import it. We do not have the capacity to import it from Jordan, from Egypt, from Lebanon, because for cost point of view and restriction. But there is no pure product all over the world. It's Brazilian or Palestinian. You will find some input coming from
somewhere. Okay, thank you. Tita Freire asks, I'd like to know how Palestinian farmers face the water problem.
With this climate change, with this drought, first of all, I during my presentation, I tried to focus in the second military order. You see, water in Palestine is one of the issue of the 5 issues for the last negotiation. We have no control at all in water resources. In West Bank, sometime under the US pressure, they increase our water share for drinking, not for agriculture. So the aquifer in the country here, there is northwest, east, whatever is the aquifer. The water share for Palestine, mainly it's for domestic, drinking, because they want to expel farmers from their land. It's very costly water for agriculture in the country. Now they push Palestinian for treatment and reuse, non-conventional treated wastewater. So they create the problem and they push Palestinian to find solution for that problem. So in Palestine, we are rich in groundwater. We are rich, but we have no access to this ground. It's completely controlled by Makarot. Makarot, this is a national career line for Israeli. They have national water budget, one private company, government, semi-government, and they distribute water through that. So they have control all of our resources.
Is there any concern in the West Bank about subterranean water becoming scarce because of Israeli overconsumption?
Yes. For the Jewish who are living in a settlement here, it's not a settlement, colonization as we agreed before, their consumption 4 times than the Palestinian with a different income, purchasing power, because they deal with water as a commodity, not as a basic human right. According to the Muslim, to the Palestinian, whatever it is, I have the right to access and utilize my natural resources, including water. But for them, they deal with Antonio Allan, whoever interested in water, they call it virtual water. There is an article regarding that, water trading and water tariff. They are very smart in that. They deal with water as a good, not as a basic human need, fully subsidized or whatever the subsidy system it will be. For us, we are paying the same cost for water as Israeli, which is not fair with the level of income we have it. So we cannot. So we are against the concept of water as a good, trading water. This is the Turkish-Israeli agenda to trade water.
Great, thank you. One question concerning specifically agricultural production and the possibility of importing to Brazil. We know how difficult it is to import because the Israeli control the aduanas, how do you say, the foreign, the market anyway. But if we were to import, and there is, the Brazilian embassy has been in talks in Hebron with businessmen and with producers and farmers and seeing the possibility, Brazil wants to import olive oil from Palestine. What advice would you give the Brazilian embassy, our trade agreement, our efforts to bring olive oil directly from Palestine? What advice would you give us? What would be important for the Palestinians in this trade?
You see, there is what we call it a preferential, let's say, trading agreements between here and there, between Brazil, Turkish, Palestine, and all this. But a piece of advice: the production cost in Palestine is very high. The production cost is very high. That's why in park policy, we are not targeting mainstream market. We are targeting fair trade, for example, shops all over the world, or this niche market who's believing in. So the idea, if I'm a consumer in Brasilia, and I want to, from not the elite, the high class, for the normal people, it's not affordable for them to import Palestine. It will be too costly compared with the Spanish or Italy or from Greek. So in park policy, we have 2 policy for that. One for local market, the second for fair trade external market. We cannot compete in the mainstream market. The production, the transaction is very high. I hope I answered the question. Especially if our Palestinian representative consulate in Brazil, they interested in, but I'm taking care of Brazilian normal people. I'm not looking for the elite class. So it's not affordable for them. It's too costly.
But then, on the other hand, if it is a fair trade, it is probably guaranteed that the families that produce the olive oil will receive.
Yes, fairly. We have a full. We export 5 products: almond, olive oil, date, pickles, originated by women groups, small women groups, with a clear source of origin, with a clear certification and accreditation from the quality, and we export it. Inshallah, when you visit Palestine, I will, and you have the chance, whoever, to visit these small cooperative, women cooperative, who's doing couscous maftool, who's doing olive, who's doing date. So we have this, but what we are dreaming is not. We are dreaming as a nation, as an economy, not as a solidarity.
Mm-hmm. Yes. No, that is very important for us to hear you say that is your goal, for sure. But I have one, because we're also here very curious to know about what happens there. I'd like to know, continuing the issue of production, you spoke about the 5 main products for export. What are the main products, Palestinian products, that circulate in these small regions, because it cannot circulate nationally, in the smaller regions? What would you say are the main products?
Within the local, let's say, market, this is a Bedouin to Bedouin dairy product, fresh vegetable produce. But within, let's say, like Hebron area, if you visit Hebron, you will see grape byproduct is they are very professional in local produce byproduct from grape. So that one is in within that. But
you said grape.
A grape and a grape byproduct. In the north, you will find olive and olive byproduct. In the Jordan Valley, you will find date and date byproduct, because each ecology, each area have their mark, production labeling, olive or grape or dairy product.
Thank you. Another question here then is, I'd like to go back to what is your priority to give attention to this. Since the Oslo process has all but failed, no? What would you say is, in your organization, the view you have for this political solution? How do you see a political solution for Palestine? Is it a one state, a federation? Is it bottom up? Do people have to build this? How can the parties help? Is politics obstructing today in Palestine this process? What could you say about your view for this solution?
I'm not a politician, but I'll try to do it as a human, how I feel, predict or see things is moving around. In the country now, between the Jordanian River and the Mediterranean Sea, there is no way for two-state solution. There is no way. De facto on ground now, settlement, colonialization, and Palestinian community, they became as one. You cannot differentiate between that and that. So this is what the Israeli, they are dreaming. That's why we are now, as a Palestinian, start the narrative is apartheid. What they are doing is apartheid. So we are dreaming in the two-state solution. We are dreaming, but de facto on ground, if you go for the maps and you see, there is no more Palestine. Palestine also is a matter of memorial. This is something I believe. But on ground, one state solution, equally human right. If they accept this case, I don't think so. Israeli, I'm not blaming or do accusation. They are fully human beings, have the right, but they have this mentality against the others. Even in the Torah, if you go for the Old Testament, they are the others. The concept, the others. They are not belonging to, as we. They differentiate themselves in a way. It's harmful for their future.
Thank you very much, Izzat. I think that was very insightful for us to listen to your views, to learn about your perspective for Palestine. So I thank you in the name of all our students very much for that.
Thanks.
And inshallah, we can meet soon.
Inshallah. Visit Palestine, especially Gaza, whenever you have the chance. Show solidarity with Gaza. You know, for my last statement for the student, the international law, according to international law, fisheries in Gaza, they have the right, according to the law, to reach 6 mile, 9 mile, 11 mile, 15 mile. Australia, for example, is 100 of kilometers. Fisheries in Gaza, every day, they have no right to go more than 3 miles from their shore. And a lot of did fisheries in that area. What we want usually to convey our message, our human political message. So visit Gaza, show solidarity with Gaza under bombing now. Inshallah, things will move better, inshallah.
Thank you very much, Izzat.
Thanks. To see you. Thanks.